Welcome, and thank you for joining us for today's discussion, Beyond Fully Insured, Alternative Benefits Funding Strategies for Small and Mid-Sized Employers. Before we get started, here are a few quick notes to help you stay connected and informed. Following the webinar, we'll send a link of the recording to all registrants so you can revisit the conversation or share it with your team. At the end of the discussion, a short survey will appear. It only takes a moment to fill out, and your feedback helps us shape future conversations that deliver the guidance and clarity you expect from Hub. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's event, Anthony Scott, Employee Benefits Chief Consulting Officer at Hub International.
Welcome to today's webinar, Beyond Fully Insured, Alternative Benefits Funding Strategies for Small and Mid-Sized Employers. I'm Anthony Scott, Chief Consulting Officer for Employee Benefits at Hub International. Now for a quick word about Hub. We're a leading full-service global insurance brokerage and financial services firm with more than 21,000 specialists across North America, helping business leaders manage risk and build the kind of organizational resilience. Today's session reflects exactly that, and we're so glad you're here. Back in June, we talked about breaking the cost cycle and the integrated strategies employers can use to get ahead of rising costs. Our second session, From Projections to Planning, went deep on the latest benefit cost trends. Now today we're going to talk about what employers can actually do once the fully insured model stops working for them. Before we get to our panelists, I want to acknowledge that many of you submitted questions with your registration. We'll do our best to address as many of those as time allows. So today I'm joined by three of my Hub colleagues. First off is Carrie Cerveni. She is the Senior Vice President of PEO and Alternative Risk Solutions and leads Hub's Alternative Risk Solutions practice for employee benefits. She's also the architect behind the strategies we'll cover today. Next up is Thomas Hodges. He is the Director of Financial Consulting for Employee Benefits. He models what these strategies actually look like financially for a client. And then last but not least, Dr. Christine Cates. She's the Director of Clinical Consulting for Employee Benefits. She also helps employers see the risk hiding in their claims data before it hits at renewal. If we go to the agenda, here's what we're going to cover today. We'll start with a look at the fully insured market, what's happening and why it matters. From there, we'll get into the self-funding fundamentals. Next, we'll walk through these three specific strategies: level funded plans, medical stop-loss captives, and reference-based pricing. We'll wrap up and close by tying it all together. And if time allows, we'll get to some of your questions. So when we look at the fully insured market, we're seeing something like 60% of employers considering a move away from fully insured this year towards self-funding or some other form of alternative risk. Carrie, can you talk a little bit about what's going on and what we're seeing in the broader market?
Absolutely. Thank you, Anthony. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our program. We are excited to have this conversation with you today. Holy crow, what isn't going on in the fully insured market at this time? And many of you have experienced it, and that's why you're joining us for this call today. You know, this is really the perfect storm, and a lot of people laugh, but I'm a 80s kid and I loved Gilligan's Island. And that has been the metaphor that has been in my mind since we started building this practice almost a year ago at this point. And if you think about the ship in the storm, many of our small employers are that ship that are in the storm of the fully insured market today. You've got increasing healthcare costs. You've got ACA reforms that drove cost and claims exposure. You've got an increasingly sick population in this country. We're not getting healthier, although we're trying, we're not quite there yet. And so you have a lot of market forces, a lot of health condition forces that are coming together all at the same time that are impacting cost, that have a ripple effect, a big ripple effect, more like a tidal wave effect in the storm on group health plans. And I'm so glad that Dr. Cates is with us today because she's really got that front row seat to what's happening from a medical cost, medical experience perspective. So Dr. Cates, you're up.
So happy to comment on what I'm seeing specifically in the claims, and I've been doing this for a long time. When it comes to the population, I would say the population health while we might be getting sicker in certain areas, what have you, there may be more oncology, we're getting better at finding it. So when I say the population hasn't necessarily changed, medicine has. Earlier diagnosis, precision therapies, advancements in treatment options, it's all increasing the complexity, which of course then affects the cost that we're seeing in healthcare. And ultimately, employers are seeing that reflected in accelerated premiums. We'll go to the next slide. I think that's what you're talking about, Carrie, on the next slide.
Yes, I am. And so thank you for that. And $27,000. I mean, it is just dumbfounding how expensive family health insurance could be through a group health plan, guys. These numbers are through group health plans. That means people are choosing between mortgages, electric, food bills. The costs are exorbitant, and we're holding this program today because we've got to start talking about doing this differently. Definition of insanity, right? How did they survive on the island? They did things differently. And these numbers show that the costs are becoming unsustainable. Thomas, you live in the world of numbers. This dyslexic liberal arts girl does not have that capability. And I would love for you to share a little bit more visibility and understanding about how we get to the numbers, what the numbers are looking like, and the world that you live in.
Absolutely. And Carrie, when we look at the numbers, as you can see on your screen there, 6% family premium increases year over year. And, when we look at overall economy and finance, a lot of our benchmarks are based on both wage growth and inflation in the overall economy. And you can see most recent year wage growth at 4% and inflation at 2.7%. So to your point earlier, healthcare has become so expensive that we're in a scenario to where, as a portion of employers spend and also employee spend, it's jumped as a tremendous percentage. And it's becoming, something that's involved in everyday life for all of our employers and employees that we work with.
So we'll unpack a lot of this as we go forward.
Okay. So as we think about trend, obviously this is first and foremost when we think about what our budgets are coming up in the next year. What we've seen over the last several years are trend increases that continue to rise that are the highest they've been in over a decade. Carrie, is this really a one-year problem? Are we going to see this change over time, or is this really something longer term that's here to stay?
Unfortunately, no one on the call and in this conversation are going to like my answer, because I think this is a long-term problem. And you have to look at your root cause, right? What's driving costs? Where's this coming from? Why is this happening? If you go back, so I'm going to take you on a 3-hour tour back to 2014, when we first passed ACA and market reforms started taking their toll on group health plans. You saw free preventative care, essential health benefits, mandated coverages, limitations on carriers' ability to raise premiums. But insurance is math, right? At the end of the day, the cost of insurance and the cost of care is tied to the claims and the exposure. So you increase coverage, you increase exposure, you increase claims, what follows? The cost of the insurance to cover those claims, exposure, and healthcare solutions. So that's what's happening in the market today. I don't have a crystal ball to talk or identify how we're going to solve for inflation. How are we going to solve for healthcare challenges? How are we going to solve for the increased claims and exposure to our group health plans, which means this problem is here to stay. The good news, though, if there is any, is that there are ways to manage this, respond to it, and even do better than we've been able to do for the last couple of years. And that's why we're here today. So Thomas, would you talk about what trend is really looking?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as Anthony mentioned, prior to COVID, we really had pretty consistent year-over-year trends in that 4 to 6% range. And as we all know, COVID turned the world upside down, and it also turned the trend curve upside down with some slight moderation in 2020, a significant spike in 2021, and then we had that dip in 2022 at the tail end of COVID. But as we've talked about, unfortunately, we've settled into this new normal where our baseline is previously was in the 4 to 6% range, and now really for the past 5 years in a row, we've been in the 8 to 10% range. And I think it just is a testament to what the market is doing, and also what Hub as your partner could help navigate you through and try to mitigate. And I think as we look at some of our alternative risk solutions, we'll find ways to navigate this.
So if we think about alternative benefits, alternative risk strategies, Carrie, this sits squarely in your world as the practice leader for that. Can you talk a little bit about what they mean relative to fully insured and what some of the key differences are?
Absolutely. And guys, we're going to start real high. And as we get deeper into the program, we're going to unpack a lot of some of the statements we're going to make in this section. So we want you to be prepared. This gets more granular as we go. But in its purest form, an alternate benefit strategy gets you out of the wash, rinse, and repeat cycle of a fully insured program where you have very little transparency, very little control, and very little ability to create cost containment solutions or even healthcare solutions that are responsible to the actual claims that are happening in your plan. Why? Because you don't get to see the actual claims that are happening in your plan. And so when you look at a chart like this and you see the alt risk clients in the darker blue, maybe it's a black, navy, I prefer navy, versus the Tiffany blue, which I always love, but not in this case, you can see that the fully insured Tiffany blue in all categories is higher than the self-insured. And we're going to help identify some of that power of being self-insured and some of the control and cost containment solutions that you can implement depending on your strategy and your approach. But the numbers really bear it out. And Thomas, I would love to hear from you around your experience with some of our self-funded clients, because that's really where you spend almost all your time, especially dealing with these numbers.
Absolutely. And I think, when we dive in a little bit deeper to this exhibit, when we look at medical only trend and as well as pharmacy in 2025, when we look at our book of business, specifically our self-insured book, there's over a 2% variance on both medical and pharmacy trend compared to the fully insured market where we conducted our Hub trend survey. So when we look at our actual data compared to market, we're seeing that variance, and over time, while 2% in 1 year may not be a tremendous number, when you compound 2% over multiple years and over the course of your benefit plan, those numbers can really add up. And I think it's truly evident in the data that we've reviewed.
Dr. Cates, can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing from the pharmaceutical side?
Sure. After years of reviewing employer pharmacy data, for me, one thing has become increasingly clear. You can no longer look at pharmacy as a single trend. When you actually look at each individual component, there are different market forces that affect each differently, not in the same way. So for your generics, you'll notice that's the most stable on the chart. The stability is structural. So that reflects your manufacturer competition, a mature marketplace, well-established substitution pathways. So really the bigger question there is, will that level of competition be sustainable moving forward for generics? Brand, it used to be it was a broad mix of therapeutic agents, and it's no longer that. GLP-1 medications have, they're in the spotlight, and they've become the dominant driver since 2022. As we watch and clinical indications expand for their use, we expect that influence to grow. And then specialty, that's really your specialty trend is driven by pipeline oncology, rare disease therapies, that represents most of the drugs in development. So with every new approval, that increases the employer's financial exposure. So, and really just as it relates to the slide, the forces that are driving pharmacy trend, they apply globally across the health plan. So they're a part of a much bigger picture, which is what's on the next slide. The four cards that are on this slide represent the healthcare costs that are shaping today's highest cost conditions. So it's your high cost conditions, your rapid therapeutic innovation, expanding eligibility as a part of that, and then your advancements in therapies. And so number one, cancer and mental health, those are today's dominant clinical cost drivers. And it's important to note that each affect costs through a different mechanism. Cancer is driven primarily by the complexities in treatment, and mental health adversely influences adherence rates, utilization, and outcomes across the entire population. And I said it earlier, medicine is becoming more precise, and the therapies that have followed are significant drivers of healthcare costs. 35% of all approvals in 2025 were oncology therapies, and every approval, again, introduces financial exposure that did not exist previously. Pharmacy trend, that reflects the cumulative impact of innovation and really the expanding drug pipeline. The 11.4% increase, that reflects the cost of new therapies entering the market. And then, and again, not to beat a dead horse, but the expanding indications for GLP-1 therapy, 42% of all commercially insured adults are eligible under existing FDA-approved clinical indications for use. So as we see additional indications add to that, we expect in the next 24 months, so does the financial exposure. So proactive health plan management has always been essential, but the funding structure really determines the visibility that's available to support that.
Thanks, Dr. Cates. As we migrate into the discussion, the really exciting stuff, right? What can we do about it? We've talked a lot about what's driving costs, where costs are going, the unsustainability of it as an employer trying to maintain budgets and still continue to offer great benefits. Carrie, what can we do in terms of making changes that's going to move the needle?
I love that question, and sadly, I do think this is very exciting. I'm going to nerd out for a little while here with my friends, but I'm going to go backwards to go forwards. And I want to start with level setting to make sure that we are all aligned on the basic foundations of how health insurance is built in an employer setting. There are really only two buckets or two categories of health insurance offered in a group health plan setting. Fully insured, which you see to the left of the dotted line, and self-funded, which you see to the right of the dotted line. In a fully insured environment, there's a couple of different ways you can offer it up. You can go to a PEO and be part of their fully insured master plan, or you can buy your insurance from Blue Cross, United, Cigna, Aetna, Buca. It's our favorite acronym. But you can buy your insurance like we've been buying insurance for many. Going to Blue Cross, getting our plan, getting our renewal, standing in front of the board. Whoops, sorry, didn't see the 25% coming. Don't have claims data, don't have visibility. Dr. Cates just put such a fine point on it. You've got to have the visibility to understand what's driving your costs and get control. Well, how do you get visibility? You move into this self-funded arena. Now, there's different ways to access and create self-funded programs. And I use the car analogy a lot. I got a Volvo about 1.5 years ago. Everybody's sick and tired of me talking about my Volvo, but I actually love my Volvo. I never thought I'd drive one, but the model Volvo is what I like. What I got was a really cool SUV. It's all blacked out. It's kind of like tough girl, and I love it. It makes me feel strong, but I'm not a sedan girl. I'm not going to drive a 4-door car. It's just not my style. When you look at access to self-funded programs, what may work for your company may be the sedan, or it may be the SUV. It may be what we call level funded here on just right next to the dotted line, or it might be all the way over, truly transparent, completely controllable by you from a cost containment, various vendor partner solutions, ASO program. So today, what we want to do is unpack some of these programs, talk about some of the differences, and help you guys start getting a flavor or a look and a feel for what model might be the right model for you. Are you an SUV person, or are you a sedan person? Are you a level funded person or a captive person? That's what we're here to talk about today.
Thanks, Carrie. I love that. Let's stay on the car theme for just a minute. And Thomas, let's talk about what we're pushing under the hood of self-funding, what it means. Are we hybrid, or are we running a VA? So talk a little bit about what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we talk about, pros and cons to the left side of the equation of what we reviewed earlier with fully insured, and then progressing on to alternative funding, with fully insured, the pros to it are you're really locked in annually from a volatility standpoint. Your carrier is going to produce your premium at renewal, and you're going to be locked in regardless of your claims experience throughout the year, right? So in that case, the carrier really is retaining the risk on behalf of you as the employer throughout the year. Now, the downside to that is, in a lot of cases, our carrier partners who we work very closely with want to be profitable over time, right? And they want to create some additional margin and premiums and support their firms. But when we look at alternative funding, not only are we trying to carve into, some of the potential carrier profitability, but we're also looking at putting in cost containment programs and trying to actively manage our plan. And, on that side of the equation, we're truly funding our claims along with stop loss premiums to provide us protection against catastrophic exposure. And then we have opportunity to retain savings for those cost containment measures that we've invested in. And I think, Dr. Cates, could you maybe comment from your standpoint on the clinical side, some of the differences in funding models and how you view it?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, usually when I sit with an employer and what I hear during, around the time discussions are happening about funding transition or a funding transition has occurred, usually the first thing is, oh, okay, now I have access to data. What the heck am I going to do with it? So clinically, the shift is having the data and then understanding what the data is telling you, and that's really how do you get to that interpretive phase, understanding, okay, emerging risk, cost drivers, changing trajectories, all of that, it's new terminology, it's new lingo. The conversation, though, shifts from when you're in a fully insured model, you're reacting at renewal. But now, when you shift your funding model, now you're talking about and making informed decisions as you move throughout the year. And just to be clear, your historical trends, they're essential. You can't manage a health plan without them, but it's only part of the story. You have to have, the whole story, which gets us to the next slide. And that breaks down, the differences, compare and contrast between what's above the waterline and what's below. Much of what influences healthcare costs are not visible in traditional reporting. Above the waterline, that's what gets reported, your PMPM, known claimants, but below is what influences not only what that all means, but where the plan is headed. So again, traditional reporting essential. You have to have it. Tells you where the plan has been, but it does not tell you what's influencing cost, and importantly, what's influencing risk. The clinical insight component of that it answers the why. If Thomas comes to me, what is going on? Why are we seeing this jump in claims, month over month? Or can you tell us a little bit more? That's where clinical insight comes in to help fill the gap, so to speak. And some of the early clinical signals identify risk while the window is open to act is open, not closed. And I'll talk more about that in a second, but influencing your future costs requires that you understand risk and how risk develops within the population. So while some catastrophic events occur without any warning, most have been visible in the claims for years, which gets me to the next slide. So I felt like this was important to discuss. So when employers, in specifically employers that are moving from fully insured into an alternative funding arrangement, when they think about risk, they often immediately will go to the catastrophic event. Clinically, That event reflects the final stage in a much longer continuum. So, and what I mean, I'll explain what each category is. Your emerging risk is where changes first become clinically detectable. So that's the earliest opportunity to recognize a member whose trajectory is changing. Gaps in care, those are missed opportunities, and that's what allows disease to progress and increases the likelihood of a catastrophic event occurring. And the escalating risk, you see that in the utilization. So it's often reflects clinical complexity. Maybe you've got somebody who has one chronic condition, they're going to 3 chronic conditions. Comorbidity compounds, and which increases the probability of that member becoming a catastrophic claimant. So really the opportunity here is not managing the catastrophic claim. And there are things that we can do to control cost, site of care transitions, all sorts of things that we can do once that person is a catastrophic claimant. But really the opportunity is recognizing that population before they get there so that you can do something about it.
Thanks, Dr. Cates. When we think about strategies, we've got several in our toolbox. Carrie, can you talk a little bit about each one?
Absolutely. So I was just making a note. Some of you may have seen my pen show up on camera, but Dr. Cates just said something that's so compelling and so important, and it really drives home to me my why, like why I put all the time and all my passion and all my energy into this practice and what we're building. And that's around gaps in care. As inflation goes up, as healthcare costs become more difficult, more expensive, as group health plans continue to be more difficult and more expensive, you've got a population of people that literally cannot afford insurance or access to care. They can't afford a $5,000 deductible. And the beauty of these strategies is that you have the ability to create financially accessible pathways to care, which is so important for the performance of your group health plan, but it's just so important, period, right? For human beings to be able to afford to see a doctor and get care. So there are 6 strategies here. We're going to focus on the top 3 today. We're going to talk about level funded programs. We'll talk a little bit about medical stop loss captives. It's kind of my favorite for the day, although reference-based pricing is a close second. We also have other conversations that we have with clients around access to care, gaps in care, various programs, affordable programs that you can layer in to a self-funded plan. ICHRA, which is an entirely different approach where you're buying coverage out in the marketplace. And then PEO on that fully insured side, where you get access to large group plans, large group plan designs in a small group environment. So you're aggregating risk, getting the look and feel of a large, 1 million people on a plan, 500,000 people on a plan, but you're still a small group. So today our focus is really on the top 3: level funded, medical stop loss, and reference-based pricing.
And as many of you are sitting there listening, many may think, you know what, self-funding feels like a big leap. And it may be for your organization. Lots of organizations very similar to yourself, they'll start in a very a journey, right? They'll stair step. They may start with level funding, which may be the right thing for them. And so when we think about level funding, we think about the non-BUCA level funding. Can you break down the mechanics of non-BUCA? And for those of you, Carrie mentioned it earlier, we love our acronyms. BUCA really stands for Blue Cross Blue Shield, United Healthcare, Cigna, and Aetna.
So I think if we go kind of under the hood, back to our car analogy, level funding truly can be a hybrid. There is the fixed cost component of it, similar to fully insured, to where typically a client will be paying a fixed premium on a monthly basis, which is going to encompass their stop loss insurance, administrative fee, and also claims exposure. But on the back end, there's some benefits to where, a group that historically has ran favorably under a fully insured plan with lower loss ratios can benefit from some of their favorable experience and get out of being rated in a pool where they may be one of the lower utilizers and run more favorably historically. So Anthony said it's truly not participating in one of the BUCA programs. it's typically placed with regional TPAs and specialty stop loss carriers, which means the employer actually gets real monthly claims data and insights into their plan as opposed to what we typically see in the market with the big players.
And, you know, Thomas, what I love about these programs is I hear as I launch the practice and I'm talking to clients and I'm talking to prospects, I'm talking to business owners, like, yeah, I've been in self-funded before, you know, it was painful, or we weren't set up properly, or we weren't funded properly, and we had shortfalls and it was expensive. And what I love about these non-BUCA level funded in general is that it's really about the economics of the program, and it gives you so much more flexibility, accessibility, and visibility. I did not do that on purpose, into your program, but it does so with minimal financial risk based on how the funding model is built. And so we really love this as kind of the training wheels.
As we think about the financials, the bottom line for employers, that's usually one of the first things they ask. Obviously, it's very important to provide a market competitive benefit, taking care of your employees and their families, but we still have to think about the financials. Can you talk a little bit about, Thomas and Carrie, what that really means for employers and what they can expect?
Yeah, so typically, you know, as I mentioned earlier, level funding can be a great fit for groups, you know, all the way down to 30 enrolled employees up to 200 enrolled employees. And as I mentioned, it really gets an employer an opportunity to get outside of being rated within a pool with other organizations and benefit, you know, should they run favorably from some of their own claims experience. And so when we look at, you know, groups that historically have had favorable loss ratios but are kind of stuck in that fully insured pool, you know, we typically will see 10 to 30% savings opportunities for those groups, you know, just based on their claims experience and getting out of kind of the cycle of being rated, you know, in a pool and in the fully insured market. And I don't know, Carrie, if you want to kind of add to that.
I do. So I want to go backwards to go forwards a little bit. And you're going to hear me use that phrase. I use it all the time. It's one of my go-tos. Level funded is a program that shares surplus with the client. So in a fully insured environment, if you don't spend all of your premium dollars on all of your claims, the carrier keeps those dollars. In a level funded environment, if you don't spend all of your premium dollars on all of your claims, you get some portion back. If you do level funded through a carrier, you share the surplus, you share the leftovers. If you're in a non-BUCA, so these private level funded programs, you get 100% of your claims dollars back. You get 100% of your data and visibility, and you have some flexibility in how you build your program. The trade-off is that administration might be a little bit different in a non-BUCA versus a BUCA program. But we like this approach as a first step. Maybe you skip it, like this is not linear. But for some clients, this is kind of like the 4-door sedan with the baby seat in the back and the extra airbags, right? If we're going back to the car metaphor versus me who's driving around in my plug-in hybrid that goes really, really fast.
Thanks, Carrie. Now let's go to our next tool in the toolbox, captives. Many of you probably have varying degrees of understanding of captives. You may have heard it within your own organization relative to some of your property and casualty or other areas, but did you know you can actually use it in your employee benefits programs as well? Carrie, this is a big part of your world. Can you talk to us a little bit about how employers use this within their benefits program and what the competitive landscape looks like?
Absolutely. So folks, this is one of my favorite solutions because it's a little bit of the best of both worlds. Employers today are kind of getting their group health programs punched in from high claims. They're out there on their own. You have a child in NICU or you have a cancer claim. You heard Dr. Cates talk about cancer and GLP-1s and some of these costs that are driving these premiums up. And you're out there on your own on an island trying to make a coconut telephone because you've landed the ship in the middle of the storm, and now what do? I like captives because captives create an opportunity for like-minded employers to come together to share in a risk pool before they hit insurance. You've heard us talk about what's happening in the insurance industry for the first half hour of this program. You heard us say several times that the fully insured market and the insured market itself is really struggling with high dollars, high claims, high premiums. It's very expensive. And so what I like about captive, and we really illustrate this nicely on the next slide, is it builds a shared risk pool layer between the claims dollars themselves and the actual insurance. So let's unpack this layer cake. And cake is my favorite, especially Publix cakes for those of you in the South. So your first layer in your Publix cake are your claims dollars. And that layer is built between employer money and employee money. This is your standard employer contribution, employee contribution dollars that are used for the first amount of claims that come in and hit the program. The next layer is your shared pool. Depending on the captive manager that you work with, this shared pool can be made up purely of employer money and collateral, or there can be some reduced premium by your stop loss carrier that also contributes toward this shared layer. But nonetheless, this is a shared layer or a shared risk pool. It creates another buffer before you hit insurance. And it's an opportunity to stabilize your group health plan in an otherwise unstable employee benefits environment. And then for certain kinds of claims that Thomas is going to help us unpack, you may hit insurance. There are thresholds where insurance is going to step in and still protect the program. So that's the beauty of captive. You have a traditional claims layer, but now you have a shared risk pool for like-minded employers to share in risk exposure and experience. And then when you exceed a certain threshold, you get into your standard stop loss insurance carrier. So Thomas, I would love for you to help everyone understand how you get to that insured layer. At what point does that trigger coverage?
Absolutely. So when we look at the next slide, we're going to look at examples of 5 unique employers that are captive participants, right? And so, there's 2 components of stop loss insurance. There's individual specific coverage and then aggregate coverage. But when we focus here on the specific coverage, you can see that each employer in the green section has what's called a specific stop loss deductible, meaning they have a deductible on individual members within their plan to where if any claimants exceed within a given contract period, they're capped in terms of their liability and ultimately reimbursed. And so you can see in our example here, we have 5 different employers with different specific stop loss deductibles. But that middle layer, the middle part of our cake, as Carrie said, that $400,000 is a shared risk pool that's unique to captive arrangements, to where all of our employers are contributing funds to cover the captive layer, so to cover risk, that $400,000 level. And then also a portion of their contribution within the captive via their premiums are dedicated towards above and beyond stop loss reinsurance through a traditional carrier. So the result of that is, navigating volatility year over year, you really have that additional layer to where you're participating in a shared risk pool for a portion of your stop loss coverage, and it can provide some better navigation for smaller groups and groups that want to navigate volatility year over year. And when we get into some specific examples within, an individual employer, in this example, we have a $750,000 large claimant. And our employer example here has a specific stop loss deductible of $100,000, right? So as the employer, I'm going to be liable for my $100,000 deductible. And then in this example, that captive layer, for example, here equates to $300,000. So the portion of premium that I'm paying into the captive is dedicated towards covering that captive layer of $300,000 that's shared among the employers within the captive. And then ultimately, due to the severity of this claim, there's reinsurance through a traditional stop loss carrier that covers the remainder of the balance. And I think when we look at, the other side of the equation, we've been looking at individual claimants. But when we look at navigating aggregate stop loss insurance, when we talk about aggregate stop loss insurance, a lot of employers and teammates in the market will refer to it as sleep insurance. So it gives us kind of our worst case scenario on the overall total claims of the plan. So for all of our membership, not just individual claimants. So in this example, the cumulative worst case scenario deductible or aggregate stop loss attachment point is 1.5 million. And similar to the specific stop loss example, we would pay a premium to within the captive, and ultimately a portion of that premium would cover the captive layer, in this case of 150,000. And then above and beyond that, we would also be contributing a portion of that premium to a traditional stop loss carrier to cover claims above that threshold. So it really just helps us navigate volatility and kind of create a smoothing effect among multiple employers. And, a lot of captive arrangements are really focused on cost containment and actively managing claims and have requirements to do so. So there's great opportunity, if you're a smaller group that hasn't looked at self-funding in the past, there's a lot of opportunity to look at captives and participate in cost containment solutions.
So, and Thomas, that's really why I love captive, right? When you think about who's a right fit for a captive, the answer today is so entirely different than what the answer would have been 5 or even 10 years ago. And 10 years ago, there were maybe 2 group health plan captive managers that I can think of off the top of my head that were around. And those were solutions for large employers, 1,000 plus, 2,000 plus. But today, in response to what's happening in the fully insured market and in the insured market in general, these captive managers and programs and TPAs and stop loss carriers have all figured out a way to build these programs to make them accessible to smaller businesses. 100, 150 lives can enter a captive today. And the beauty of that is you are pooling your risk with other businesses. So you're not sitting out there in a self-insured plan on an island trying to make your coconut telephone and hope that it works. However, because you are pooling risk with other employers, you better believe that that captive is going to do everything it can to protect that risk pool, to ensure that it performs well, because that risk pool is what makes or breaks the entire program. And so if you are interested in captive, you have to be willing to follow rules. There are behavior requirements. And what I mean by that is stewardship reports, quarterly stewardship meetings that you are absolutely required to attend, cost containment solutions that the captive manager may suggest or even require that you put in place to help control the claims that are occurring in your organization's claims pool in particular, member meetings that you may have to attend. Each captive has kind of their own scorecard or their own approach to managing that risk pool that ties right back to its member population and their behavior. There's a lot more nuances to captive that need to be unpacked. And so if captive is something that you're interested in, don't be intimidated by it. It can feel a little overwhelming and complicated, but it really isn't. It's just a way to pool risk at a certain layer, so long as the people in that risk pool are behaving the way we all want them to protect the dollars that everybody is contributing for the greater good of the organization. And that's really what captive is about. It is a greater good mindset when you're interested in being part of a captive organization.
So now we're going to move to the next tool in our toolbox, and Dr. Cates is going to walk us through that. It's reference-based pricing, which is really a lever that we can pull that impacts cost at the source of service, which is how hospitals and facilities are paid for the care that they provide. Dr. Cates, can you walk us through what that really means for employers and their employees?
Sure. So first off, I'm intentionally going to keep this very high level. Reference-based pricing, you can get into the weeds very quickly, but to understand reference-based pricing, you have to understand what that's replacing. Every hospital maintains something that's called a charge master, which essentially is a master list of healthcare services for that facility. Think of it, it's the sticker price for the service. The traditional commercial reimbursement starts first with that hospital charge master, that list price, and then they negotiate from there a discount from that price. Reference-based pricing takes a completely different approach. It starts first with Medicare-based reimbursement, rather than the charge master. So when you think about, the concept is relatively straightforward, but I always think it's easier to appreciate it when you see it applied in practice. Carrie, you want to walk us through the next example?
Absolutely. And to do that, we're going to go on vacation. And we're going to go to the islands. And my favorite island to go on vacation is the British Virgin Islands. And when you go on vacation in the islands, you buy fabulous hats and jewelry and other things from the stands in the little shop area or shopping area. And I remember the first time I bought something from a stand in the islands, I was so caught off guard that there wasn't a price tag. I'm like, what do you mean there's no price tag? How do I know how much this is? And the seller told me the price that they wanted me to pay. And later I found out that one of my friends got it for half of it because they were an experienced negotiator and they proposed the price. They didn't wait for the seller to propose the price. Reference-based pricing is a little bit like that. If you think about a hospital charge master, that is the seller proposing the price. Where's the seller going to start when they propose a price? They're going to start high. Where am I going to start if I propose the price? I'm going to start lower. I want to be fair. I want you to make money. You're not a nonprofit. I appreciate the time and effort that went into making my beautiful necklace, but I'm going to start lower. And that's what reference-based pricing does. The carriers are like me the first time I walked up to a stand. They start at the hospital's offer. Reference-based pricing starts at Medicare. Medicare is hospital costs plus some percentage. Reference-based pricing starts at Medicare, which is already above hospital costs. There's already profit built into Medicare for the hospital, but now you're going a bit higher, 20%, 30%, whatever it might be. It shaves tremendous dollars off of claims costs. It's no longer about network. Your employees can go to any facility that they want, any hospital that they want. But there are risks here, and we want to be really, really clear about those risks because this is definitely a model that is not for everybody. Remember, we talked about which car is right for which family, which group health plan offer and strategy is right for your organization. And there are definitely risks associated with using reference-based pricing. Yes, it's great to get outside of the shackles of networks. And yes, it's great to create a program that offers tremendous opportunity for savings, but you have to be really careful in how you build it. So on the next slide, we talk about what some of those risks are. And I'm going to boil it down into two basic categories. One is when you get an ID card, there's no network. So there's no Blue Cross Blue Shield, Cigna, United Healthcare. There's no Buca logo on that card. And so when you go to the hospital to get pre-authorization and they ask for a copy of your insurance before your surgery, they're like, we don't take this. We don't know what this is. So number one priority is that you're working with a reference-based pricing vendor and TPA that is available at all times, will answer the phone, and will be able to navigate the front desk person or appointment setting person or the insurance verification person at the facility so that they understand that they are going to actually be paid. There really is insurance here. There really is coverage. Because what happens next is with experienced concierge style reference-based pricing partners, they will then negotiate the price for your procedure so that you don't receive balance bills from that facility because the price was agreed upon in advance. Because reference-based pricing doesn't tie to a carrier network, nobody agrees in advance what the pricing is. So when you haven't pre-negotiated the cost for your gallbladder removal or your tonsillectomy or your appendectomy or whatever the addectomy might be, there is a chance that the hospital will take the payment that the reference-based pricing vendor believes is fair, Medicare plus 30% or 20%, and balance bill the employee. About 3% on average across the country, 3% of facilities balance bill. Of those 3%, about 0.2% go to litigation. This is all really important to understand because if the employee gets a balance bill, the very first thing the employee needs to do is send it to the TPA. Fair Credit Reporting Act protects the employee's credit once the TPA files the dispute with the facility, and then they'll negotiate the balance that's due and come up with a number that the plan will pay, not the employee, the plan. Communication is key, folks. You have to have executive buy-in. You have to have a culture of communication. You have to have an environment where you can get in front of your employees and they will hear you. Really good broker partners will bring communication tools and strategies and suggestions and ideas to ensure that happens. But reference-based pricing is a tremendous cost saver in your group health plan, but it does come with risks. And like all of these strategies, not necessarily the right program for every employer. And certainly I'll part with this thought. We recommend you offer it as a dual option, not wipe out all of your health plan, wipe out all of your BUCA and go solely into reference-based pricing. Whew, that would be a really rough ride for you.
Thank you. So we've covered a lot today across 3 very different strategies within self-funding and alternative risk, but they all came back to the same idea. You can't manage what you can't see. Let's close by talking about how the financial and clinical pieces come together to help a client find the right fit. Dr. Cates, Thomas, Carrie, can you help us put it all together?
Sure, I'll start. So each strategy that we talked about today really comes down to 3 questions. The first revolves around identifying risk. Clinical risk signals, those are the earliest indicators of where risk is headed in the plan and ultimately financial exposure in the future. Early identification creates the opportunity to act early on. So Thomas, how do you quantify the financial impact of risk once it's identified?
Yes, and I think that's one of the great things about Hub and our financial and actuarial consulting practice is we really focus on helping employers navigate transitioning funding models and modeling the cost impact of risk. And we've reviewed a myriad of strategies today, but really at the core is how do we model the risk versus reward opportunities of taking that next step and looking at alternative funding. And I think that really leads into some of the strategy components that Carrie reviewed today.
Well, and it becomes so important that you're working with your advisors and your account executives and our subject matter experts here at Hub to identify the strategies that make sense for your business. Simply because a strategy sounds like it could make a difference and sounds good or looks good on paper doesn't mean that it's the right fit for your organization. And so that becomes a key component. You may get all of the data and have all of the potential financial benefit, but you've got employees who don't understand how to use the program, or you've got a private equity group that doesn't appreciate the cash outlay that may be necessary to go in a particular program, then you've picked a strategy that just doesn't work for you.
So now there are a few things I want to leave with each of you today. First off is alternative funding is genuinely within reach. The question is fit, timing, and risk tolerance, not eligibility. Second, financial and clinical insight work best together. That's what separates a strategic advisor from a transactional one. Third, the earlier you engage, the better. And lastly, this isn't right for everyone. And a good advisor will help you determine what's the best strategy for your organization. So now, before we wrap up, let's take a few minutes to address some of the questions that came in ahead of today's session. First one is, how do employees typically react when a company moves off a big name carrier? Carrie, is this one you'd like to take?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. You know, I'm going to reframe the question a little bit, because if the person that wrote this question was asking about how does an employer react when you leave fully insured, they generally don't know that they're leaving fully insured, because it's really important to know, especially for those of you joining us today that have not supported self-funded programs before. In a self-funded arrangement, you're still able to offer a Cigna network or a United network or a Blue Cross Blue Shield network. So oftentimes when an employer moves to self-funded, it's seamless and not visible to the employee, or the employee is actually getting greater access to care, new programs, new solutions that they didn't have when you were sitting inside of a fully insured program. So there's mostly upside when you're designing a self-insured program with the employee experience in mind, because you're going to be able to meet them where they are.
Thank you. Let's take one more question. Carrie, I'm going to turn it back over to you again. If this turns out not to be the right fit for a client or an employer, can we reverse course, or are we stuck kind of moving forward?
You can always reverse course, right? Nothing is ground in stone, but some of it might be etched slightly depending on which solution you take. And so, for example, captive solutions are a long-term strategy, right? We really encourage employers to hang in there through the rough times. Thomas and Dr. Cates and I have had a lot of conversations about, how long can an employer expect to have top performing positive claims years? How often do you see a difficult claims year? And it's really, and you guys can correct me if I'm misstating this, but every 3 to 5 years or so, you're going to have a rough year. You might have a couple of rough years. And so you've got to withstand that and have staying power and sustainability through the hard times. And when you're building out a solution that allows savings in the good years, you're going to ferret those away. You're going to stockpile those savings in the good years to offset the exposure in the bad years. So can you get out? Yes. But just because you can, should you? Our recommendation is that you go into this with a long-term commitment in mind.
Great. Well, thank you to Carrie, Thomas, and Dr. Cates for a great conversation. And thank you to everyone in attendance for spending part of your day with us. We've covered a lot of ground, from the pressures driving fully insured premiums to self-funding fundamentals, to 3 specific strategies, or as we call them, tools in your toolbox for employers that they're using right now to take control of their healthcare costs. If today's session sparked questions about where your organization stands, our team is here to help. Reach out to your Hub representative or visit hubinternational.com to connect with our alternative risk practice. Following today's session, we'll send out a link to the replay page, where you'll find a recording, a PDF of today's presentation, as well as related resources, so you can go deeper on anything we covered today. That follow-up email will also include information on your continuing education credits. And finally, before you sign off, please take a moment to complete the brief survey that will appear on your screen. Let us know whether today's topic was valuable, what you'd like to hear more about in future sessions, and whether you'd like a Hub advisor to follow up with you directly. Your feedback is very important to us. On behalf of Hub International, thank you for joining today's webinar. This now concludes our broadcast.